The email arrived on a Tuesday. Not a Monday when bad news feels almost expected. Not a Friday when you can at least drown it in weekend plans. A random Tuesday afternoon when I was in the middle of preparing for the biggest client pitch of my career. The subject line was blank, just an attachment. I almost deleted it as spam until I saw the sender, Olivia Martinez, my husband's secretary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I clicked it open without thinking, expecting meeting notes, or maybe the dinner reservation details Dan had promised to send over. Instead, my screen filled with a grainy black and white image. For a split second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the world stopped spinning. A sonogram. With two names printed neatly at the top, Olivia Martinez and Daniel Peterson, my husband. The timestamp was from yesterday. I sat there, coffee halfway to my lips, staring at the proof that my life, the one I had carefully built over 8 years of marriage and 14 years of career climbing, was shattering before my eyes. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I had two choices: crumble or stand. By the time I closed my laptop that evening, I had already called my lawyer. I met Daniel Peterson when we were both ambitious 20-somethings at Horizon Marketing Solutions. I was 25, fresh from my MBA, determined to climb every rung of the corporate ladder without looking down. Dan was 28, charismatic, with the kind of confidence that made people naturally gravitate toward him in meetings. We were assigned to the same project team, developing a campaign for a struggling local tech startup. Emma Wilson, he'd said, extending his hand that first day. I've heard you're the one to watch around here. I'd smiled, shaken his hand firmly. Funny, I was about to say the same about you. For 3 months, we worked late nights, ordered too much takeout, and transformed that tech startup's brand until they secured second-round funding. We celebrated with champagne on the office rooftop, and that's when Dan first kissed me. I breathed. The end of the year, we were inseparable, the power couple of Horizon Marketing. Our boss, Richard Bennett, pulled me aside after a quarterly review. You two work well together, he'd said, leaning against his desk with that calculating look he always had. But be careful, Emma. Romance in the workplace can get messy. I'd assured him we were professionals first, couple second. I believed it too. We had rules. No public displays of affection at work, no favoritism, no bringing arguments from home into the office. For the most part, we succeeded. 3 years later, Dan proposed, and 6 months after that, we stood in front of friends and family exchanging vows. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs even then. The way Dan's eyes would linger a second too long on the cocktail waitress. How he'd charm my college friends until they blushed and looked away. But I was in love and climbing the corporate ladder so quickly that I barely had time to question anything. We should start our own agency, Dan said one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of our downtown apartment. We have the clients, the skills, the connections. Why keep making someone else rich? I propped myself up on one elbow. You're serious? Dead serious. He turned to face me, eyes alive with ambition. Wilson Peterson Marketing, or Peterson Wilson if you prefer. He grinned. Though alphabetically, you win. The idea took root. We stayed up until 3 a.m. sketching business plans on our kitchen, whiteboard, drinking wine, and dreaming big. By morning, I was convinced we'd build something together. Something that would be partly mine, something no one could take away from me. We gave our notices at Horizon, facing Richard's disappointment and warnings about the high failure rate of startups. 3 of our loyal clients agreed to follow us. My parents loaned us $50,000 from their retirement fund. Dan's former college roommate, Michael Taylor, came in as an angel investor. We found a small office space in the riverfront district, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette. But the large windows overlooked the water, and on clear days, you could see all the way to the mountains. Wilson Peterson Marketing was born. The first year was exhilarating and terrifying. We worked around the clock, sometimes sleeping on the office couch when deadlines loomed. We landed a major account with a regional bank, then a healthcare provider. We hired our first employee, then our second. I handled the creative strategy. Dan managed client relationships. We were equals in every way, co-founders and co-CEOs. Then came the Anderson account, a national retail chain looking to rebrand after a PR crisis. They had money, influence, and a CMO who played hardball. We wanted them badly. "We need to look bigger than we are," Dan said as we prepared for the pitch. "More established." I agreed. We rented a larger meeting space, brought in freelancers to beef up our presentation, and I worked nights refining our proposal until it gleamed. 2 days before the meeting, Dan came to me with a suggestion. "They're traditional guys, Emma. Old school. I think it would be better if I lead the pitch alone." I stared at him. "Alone? This is our company. We're partners." "Of course we are," he said, rubbing my shoulders. "But these guys, they respond better to a certain approach. Trust me on this." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Dan charmed the Anderson team, landed the account, and brought in an additional $500,000 of business. I told myself the end justified the means. I told myself we were building something bigger than my ego. That became the pattern. For traditional clients, Dan would take the lead. I'd prepare the strategies, develop the campaigns, manage the creative team, but stay in the background. With more progressive clients, we'd present as equal partners. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance shifted. We moved to larger offices on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise, hired a team of 15, then 20. Dan suggested we adjust our titles. He would be CEO, I would be Chief Creative Officer. "It makes more sense structurally," he explained. "Clients expect a clear leadership hierarchy." Again, I agreed. The business was thriving, after all. We bought a house in Oakwood, a sleek, modern design with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen I'd always dreamed of. We discussed having children, decided to wait until the company was more established. "We're building our legacy," Dan would say, kissing me on the forehead. "There's time." In our 5th year, we hired Olivia Martinez as Dan's executive assistant. She was 26 with a degree in communications and a resume that included 2 years at a competing agency. Smart, efficient, with a warm laugh and the kind of natural beauty that doesn't need makeup to enhance it. "She'll be perfect," Dan said after the interview. "Organized, quick learner, great with clients." I agreed with him. Olivia was qualified, professional, and seemed genuinely excited about our company culture. I gave my approval without hesitation. For the first few months, everything ran smoothly. Olivia streamlined Dan's chaotic schedule, remembered client preferences, and even helped reorganize our filing system. She brought homemade cookies to team meetings and remembered everyone's birthdays. The office ran more efficiently with her in it. I was busy launching our digital marketing division, bringing in new talent and expanding our client base. Some weeks, I barely saw Dan at the office. He was traveling for client meetings while I managed operations at home. We passed like ships, in the night, exchanging quick updates over breakfast or late-night texts. "We should take a vacation," I suggested one rare Sunday when we were both home and awake before noon. "Just a long weekend. Reconnect." Dan looked up from his phone. "Great idea. Let me check my schedule with Olivia tomorrow." It was a throwaway comment, but something about it bothered me. I pushed the feeling aside. The Anderson account grew, bringing in referrals and expanding our portfolio. We won awards, got written up in industry publications. Wilson Peterson Marketing was becoming a name people recognized. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt a creeping unease. Board meetings that once included me now happened when I was conveniently out of town, Financial decisions were made, and I'd learn about them after the fact. Just streamlining things, Dan would explain. No need to burden you with the operational details when you're so brilliant with the creative side. I started noticing other changes too. Dan working later, new cologne, a gym membership he actually used, weekend golf meetings that mysteriously left no tan lines. But I was busy, stressed, and part of me didn't want to look too closely. We had built this company from nothing. We had invested everything. What would happen if I rocked the boat? Then came the Morton proposal. A lucrative healthcare client with a massive budget for rebranding. I developed the strategy, created the mock-ups, rehearsed the presentation for days. The morning of the pitch, Dan casually informed me that he would handle it alone. What? No. This is my campaign, Dan, my vision. And it's brilliant, he assured me. But Morton's CMO is friends with Anderson's. They play golf together, old fraternity brothers. They expect a certain approach. They haven't even met me, I argued. How do they know what to expect? Dan sighed, checking his watch. Emma, we don't have time for this. The meeting's in an hour. I need the presentation files. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I remember standing in our glass-walled conference room, clutching my laptop to my chest, feeling something fundamental shift between us. No, Dan blinked. No. No, this is my campaign. I'm presenting it. We're co-founders of this agency, and it's time these clients recognize that. For a moment, tension crackled between us. Then Dan's face softened. You're right. I've been protective, trying to shield you from the old boys club mentality. But you can handle yourself. Of course. You can. We'll present together. Relief flooded through me. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe Dan was just trying to spare me from dealing with difficult clients. We presented to Morton together, landed the account, and celebrated with champagne in the office afterward. Dan toasted me in front of the team, praising my vision and creativity. Everything felt back on track. That night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find Dan's side of the bed empty. The blue glow of his phone illuminated the bathroom. I heard his hushed voice, then quiet laughter. When he returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep. Just a client emergency, he murmured when I woke up and questioned him. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In the morning, I checked his phone while he showered. There were no late-night calls in his log. He had deleted them. Something cold settled in my stomach. I began paying attention. Olivia's lingering, glances at Dan during meetings, the inside jokes they seemed to share, the coffees that appeared on his desk that I hadn't ordered, the way he'd touch her shoulder when passing her desk. But I needed proof before confronting him. I focused on our upcoming client presentations, our expansion plans. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the day of the company's 6th anniversary celebration. We had rented out Paradiso, an upscale restaurant with a private terrace overlooking the river. The entire team would be there, along with key clients and industry partners. I arrived early to check the arrangements. The staff directed me to the private dining room upstairs. As I approached, I heard Dan's laugh, followed by a softer, feminine one. I slowed my steps, suddenly reluctant to turn the corner. They were standing close, too close, by the window. Dan's hand rested on Olivia's waist, his head bent toward hers. She was looking up at him with an expression I recognized all too well. I had looked at him that same way once. I cleared my throat loudly. They jumped apart, Olivia's face flushing. Emma, you're early, Dan said, his voice overly casual. Apparently not early enough, I replied, my tone icy. Olivia mumbled something about checking with the caterers and slipped past me. Dan approached, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. It's not what you think, he began. the oldest line in the book. "What exactly do I think, Dan?" She was upset about a personal matter. I was comforting her. I stared at him, at this man I had built a life with, a business with. "Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." The party went ahead as planned. We played the perfect power couple, accepting congratulations on our success. I smiled until my face hurt, drank too much champagne, and avoided being alone with my husband. When we got home, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, Dan apologized, swore nothing was happening, called it a momentary lapse in judgment, promised to maintain strictly professional boundaries with Olivia. I wanted to believe him. We had built so much together. Walking away would mean dismantling not just our marriage but our company, our shared dream. So I chose to trust him, or at least I pretended to. Meanwhile, I began paying closer attention to the business structure. I reviewed contracts I had previously skimmed. I asked our accountant for detailed financial reports. I scheduled one-on-one meetings with board members. What I discovered disturbed me. While the company bore both our names, recent restructuring had diluted my ownership stake to 30%. Decision-making power had been gradually concentrated with Dan and 2 board members who always voted with him. My creative division generated 60% of our revenue, but I controlled less than a third of the company's future. "It was just easier this way," Dan explained when confronted. "You hate dealing with the business side. I was protecting you, letting you focus on what you do best." I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and wondered how I had missed so many warning signs. "I want equal ownership restored," I said finally, "and I want a seat at every board meeting moving forward." Dan agreed readily, almost too readily. He promised to have the lawyers draft new agreements. Weeks passed. The papers remained in process. Meanwhile, Dan was traveling more frequently, often with Olivia accompanying him for administrative support. I buried myself in work, expanding my division, bringing in new clients who specifically wanted to work with me. I built my own reputation separate from Dan's, separate from our company. I reconnected with industry contacts, updated my portfolio, had lunch with former colleagues. I wasn't planning an exit strategy, not consciously, but something in me was preparing for battle. Then came that Tuesday afternoon and the email that changed everything. A sonogram with 2 names that shouldn't have been together. Proof that while I had been fighting for my place in our company, I had already lost my place in my marriage. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then deleted it from my work inbox. I completed my client presentation, led my team meeting, and smiled at Olivia when she passed me in the hallway. I was surprisingly calm. The time for tears would come later. Now was the time for strategy. That evening, I called James Richardson, a lawyer I had consulted when reviewing our company structure. "I need to see you first thing tomorrow," I told him. "And James? Bring a forensic accountant." James Richardson's office occupied the corner of a renovated textile factory downtown. Exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and furniture that managed to look both vintage and modern. It was 7:30 in the morning when I arrived, carrying a leather portfolio containing everything I could gather overnight: financial statements, company contracts, emails, screenshots. The building was nearly empty, but James was waiting, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a thermos of coffee and a yellow legal pad already covered in notes. "Emma," he said, rising to greet me with a firm handshake. "This is Vanessa Morales, the forensic accountant I mentioned." A woman with sleek, dark hair and intelligent eyes nodded from her seat at the conference table, surrounded by laptops and file folders. She didn't smile. I immediately liked her for that. "Let me be clear about what I want," I said, sitting down and opening my portfolio. "I want what's mine. Half of everything we built together, not the 30% I've been left with. And I want to make absolutely certain that he doesn't get to write me out of this story. James nodded, making a note. And the marriage? I took a breath, placed the printed sonogram on the table between us. Over. For the next 3 hours, we dissected my life like a laboratory specimen. Financial records, ownership agreements, client contracts. The digital trail of my contributions to Wilson Peterson Marketing. Emails where Dan acknowledged my work, my ideas, my leadership. Evidence of the gradual restructuring that had diluted my control. This is actually more common than you'd think, Vanessa said, gesturing to a spreadsheet showing the ownership transition. The shift happened incrementally, so you might not have noticed each individual change. A percentage point here, a board, structure adjustment there. I noticed, I said quietly. I just didn't want to believe what I was seeing. James tapped his pen against his legal pad. The good news is that you've maintained meticulous records. The bad news is that you did. Sign these agreements. They're legally binding. I signed because my husband, my business partner, asked me to. Because I trusted him. I understand, and the infidelity might help us in the divorce proceedings, but it doesn't automatically invalidate the business arrangements. Then, what do we do? I asked. James smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. We build a different kind of case, one based on your intellectual property, your client relationships, and your right to protect what you've created. The plan we developed was methodical. First, secure my personal financial position by moving funds to accounts in my name only. Second, document my contributions to all active client projects. Third, prepare evidence of Dan's infidelity for the divorce proceedings. Fourth, develop leverage for negotiating a business settlement. What kind of leverage? I asked. James leaned forward. The kind that makes fighting you more costly than settling with you. I left the meeting with a detailed action plan and a strange sense of calm. The shock was wearing off, giving way to something harder, more focused. I drove to the office, wearing the same determined expression I'd worn when pitching to our first clients 6 years ago. The office was already buzzing when I arrived. Creative teams huddled around concept boards, account managers on calls with clients, the familiar rhythm of a successful agency. My agency. I walked past the reception desk, nodding to Sarah, our front desk manager who had been with us since year 2. Morning, Emma. Dan's looking for you. Said to send you to his office when you got in. Thanks. I'll head there shortly. Instead, I went to my office first, closing the door behind me. I needed a moment to collect myself, to put on the mask I'd need to wear in the coming weeks. I opened my laptop and began implementing the first steps of James's plan. Emails to our financial advisor, secure transfers, password changes. My phone buzzed with a text from Dan. Where are you? Need to discuss Morton presentation. I texted, back, in my office. Come by when you're free. 10 minutes later, he knocked and entered without waiting for a response. He looked tired but energized, that familiar intensity burning in his eyes when a big project was coming together. There you are. Everything okay? You left early yesterday. Never texted me back last night. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had loved for 8 years. The father of another woman's child. The business partner who had slowly edged me out of my own company. I wondered if he had ever truly seen me, or if I had just been another asset to acquire, another stepping stone. I was working on the Morton presentation, I said, my voice steady. Lost track of time. He accepted this without question, launching into ideas for the upcoming pitch. I listened, nodding, taking notes, playing my part. All the while, I was cataloging his mannerisms, his gestures, the way he assumed I would agree with his approach. Had he always been this way, Or had I simply been too blinded by ambition and love to notice? So, I'm thinking we lead with the healthcare metrics, then transition to the rebrand concept. What do you think? It's solid, I said. I'd add the patient journey visualization in the middle section. It ties everything together visually. Perfect. He smiled, and for a moment, he was the Dan I'd fallen in love with. Brilliant, collaborative, appreciative of my input. That's why we make such a great team. The irony wasn't lost on me. I smiled back, the muscles in my face straining with the effort. Yes, we certainly do. He paused at the door. Dinner tonight? We've barely seen each other this week. I have to finish some things here. Don't wait up. He nodded, distracted already by his buzzing phone. Tomorrow, then. After he left, I sat motionless at my desk, breathing slowly. I had just lied to my husband with perfect composure. The realization didn't upset me as much as I thought it would. Something fundamental had shifted inside me the moment I saw that. Sonogram. The bonds of loyalty, trust, and love had snapped all at once, leaving me strangely free. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was the consummate professional, leading client meetings, directing my creative team, collaborating with Dan when necessary. By night, I worked with James and Vanessa, building my case piece by methodical piece. I discovered financial discrepancies that raised serious questions, consulting fees to shell companies, expense reports for trips that seemed to have no business, purpose, and most tellingly, preparation for a corporate restructuring that would have further reduced my role to a glorified creative director while consolidating control with Dan and the board members loyal to him. He was planning to push you out eventually, Vanessa concluded after reviewing the documents I'd found. The question is whether he was doing it for purely business reasons or to make room for someone else. The answer came through Lisa Williams, our HR director. I had always maintained good relationships across the company, treating everyone with respect regardless of their position. Lisa had been with us since the early days, and while she reported to Dan on the org chart, she had always seen me as an equal leader of the company. Emma, do you have a minute? She asked, catching me as I was about to leave one evening. I invited her into my office, closed the door. I've been debating whether to tell you this, she began, clearly uncomfortable. It's not my place to get involved in personal matters, but given your position in the company— What is it, Lisa? Olivia has requested maternity leave beginning in 6 months. The paperwork crossed my desk yesterday. She hesitated. Dan approved it already, personally. I managed to thank her calmly, as if she had simply informed me about a routine HR matter. Only after she left did I allow myself a moment of raw emotion, pressing my palms against my eyes, breathing through the fresh wave of betrayal. Not just an affair, then. A future he had planned without me. That evening, I added another item. To my growing file, documentation of Olivia's maternity leave request. Then I made an appointment with my personal physician. If Dan and I had been intimate in recent months, increasingly rare but not non-existent, I needed to know if I should be tested for STDs. The thought made me physically ill. The Morton presentation was scheduled for the following week. I threw myself into the preparation, perfecting every slide, rehearsing every transition. This account would add significant revenue to our bottom line and enhance our healthcare portfolio. More importantly, it was based entirely on my strategy, my creative vision. It was mine. 2 days before the presentation, Dan called me into his office. Olivia was conspicuously absent from her desk outside. I've been thinking about the Morton pitch, he said, leaning back in his chair. Their board is pretty traditional. I'm wondering if we should maintain our usual approach. I knew immediately what he meant. I was expected to prepare everything, then step aside and let him present. It alone. Our usual approach, I repeated. You mean you present without me? He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. They specifically asked for me to lead the presentation. Apparently, Reynolds at Anderson recommended me personally. I studied his face, searching for some recognition of what he was doing, some awareness of the pattern we had fallen into. There was none. Just the benevolent condescension of a man who believed he was protecting me from rejection. I see. And what exactly will you tell them when they ask about the strategy? The customer? Journey mapping? The visual direction? All the elements I developed? Emma, come on, we're a team. I'll represent both of us. Like you've been representing both of us on the board? In the company structure? In our marriage? He frowned, caught off guard by my direct challenge. What are you talking about? Nothing, I said, falling back into the role I had been playing. You're right. You should lead the presentation. His relief was palpable. I'll make sure they know it's your strategy. I always give you credit, you know that. I nodded, already mentally cataloging this conversation for my file. Of course you do. That night, I met with James again, bringing him up to speed on the latest developments. We're almost ready to make our move, he said. But I need to know exactly what outcome you want. Divorce, obviously. But what about the business? I had been thinking about this question for days. I want fair compensation for what I've built, half the company's value at minimum. And I want to keep my clients, the ones who came to us because of me, who work directly with my team. You want to start fresh, James summarized. Your own agency, yes, Wilson Creative. No Peterson, never again. It won't be easy. Non-compete clauses, client contracts, they're all with Wilson Peterson Marketing. I helped write those contracts. I know exactly where the vulnerabilities are. James smiled, that same sharp smile that wasn't quite warm. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The Morton presentation arrived. I dressed carefully that morning, AE, charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, subtle but expensive jewelry. Professional, powerful, memorable. I brought 2 copies of the presentation, one on my laptop, one on a flash drive. Just in case. The Morton team arrived at 10. Their CMO, Jeffrey Morton himself, led a group of 5 executives into our conference room. Dan greeted them warmly, introducing our team. When he came to me, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. And this is Emma Wilson, our Chief Creative Officer. She's developed the strategy we'll be sharing today. Jeffrey Morton shook my hand firmly. I've heard a lot about your work, Ms. Wilson. I was particularly impressed by the patient engagement campaign you developed for Westfield General. I smiled. Thank you. That was a challenging project with rewarding results. Dan smoothly guided everyone to their seats, positioning himself at the head of the table. Shall we begin? What followed was exactly the pattern we had fallen into, over years. Dan presenting my ideas as if they were collaborative efforts, taking slightly more credit for the strategic elements, emphasizing his relationships with their board members. I watched the Morton team watching him, the men nodding along, responding to his charm offensive, the women occasionally glancing at me with unreadable expressions. When he reached the customer journey segment, the most innovative part of the proposal, he faltered slightly. This approach allows us to target each demographic with personalized messaging that resonates with their specific healthcare concerns. Jeffrey Morton leaned forward. Can you elaborate on how you developed this segmentation? It's quite different from anything we've seen. Dan hesitated. Well, we used a combination of data analytics and creative insight. Actually, I interrupted smoothly. May I address this? It's a methodology I've been refining. Dan had no choice but to yield the floor. I stood, moving to the presentation screen. The traditional approach to healthcare marketing tends to segment by demographic data: age, income, location. What we've done instead is create emotional journey maps based on patient anxiety points. I clicked to the next slide, one Dan hadn't seen yet. These heat maps show where potential patients experience the highest stress during their healthcare decision-making process. For the next 15 minutes, I commanded the room, explaining the research, the methodology, the creative application. The Morton team was fully engaged, asking questions, taking notes. When I finished and returned to my seat, there was a moment of impressed silence. "That's remarkable," Jeffrey said finally. "Truly innovative approach, Ms. Wilson." Dan quickly regained control of the presentation, but something had shifted in the room. The Morton team began directing more questions to me. By the end of the meeting, it was clear who they saw as the creative force behind the proposal. As they were leaving, Jeffrey pulled me aside. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up specifically about the journey mapping. Are you available next week?" "Absolutely," I said, handing him my card. "Email me directly, and we'll set it up." Dan was quiet as we walked back to our offices. I could feel his irritation simmering beneath the surface. Sure enough, he stopped me before I could enter my office. What was that about? The extra slides? The direct follow-up? I met his gaze calmly. That was me doing my job, making sure our potential client understands the full value of our proposal. "We had agreed on an approach, Emma. You went off script." "Did I? I don't recall agreeing to be sidelined. I developed that strategy, Dan. Every element of it. I have a right to present my own work." His expression hardened. "This isn't about who gets credit. It's about what works best for the company. Is it? Or is it about what works best for you?" He took a step back, studying me with narrowed eyes. "What's going on with you lately? You've been distant, argumentative." "Have I? Maybe I'm just tired of being treated like an employee in my own company. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, Dan, what exactly is my role here now? Because it seems to me that I develop the strategies, build the client relationships, lead the creative team. Yet somehow, I own less and less of the company every year." He glanced around, aware that we were still in the hallway where others might overhear. "Let's not do this here. We can talk at home." "Fine. Tonight. Don't work late." The message was clear. Don't use Olivia as an excuse to avoid this conversation. He nodded stiffly and walked away. I entered my office and closed the door, heart pounding. It was the first time I had directly confronted him, the first crack in my carefully maintained facade. I wasn't ready yet. My preparations with James weren't complete, but I couldn't keep playing the compliant partner much longer. I spent the afternoon in meetings with my creative team, reviewing ongoing projects and ensuring that everything was documented in detail. Which team members had contributed what ideas? Which clients had specifically requested to work with me or my team? I was creating a record, a paper trail that would be invaluable in the coming weeks. At 5, I received an email from Jeffrey Morton requesting a meeting the following Tuesday to discuss the patient journey mapping in more detail. He had copied both Dan and me. I responded, confirming my availability. Dan did not weigh in. By 6, most of the office had cleared out. I gathered my things, preparing for the confrontation that awaited me at home. As I passed Olivia's desk, I noticed her computer was still on. Her jacket hung neatly over her chair. She was still in the building somewhere, with Dan, perhaps. I continued walking, refusing to let myself look toward his office. Whatever they were doing, it would soon be irrelevant to my life. The drive home gave me time to collect my thoughts. I wasn't going to reveal everything I knew. Not yet. This would be a controlled escalation, a test to see how Dan responded to direct questioning. His reaction would tell me how to proceed. Our house was dark when I arrived, no sign of Dan's car in the driveway. I checked my watch, 6:45 p.m. I had specifically asked him not to work late tonight. Another broken promise to add to the growing list. I unlocked the door, disarmed the security system, and moved through the quiet house, turning on lights. The kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the island counter, reviewing notes on my phone while I waited. 7 o'clock passed, then 8. I texted him, "Where are you? We need to talk." No response. By 9, my patience had evaporated. I called his cell. It went straight to voicemail. I called the office main line. No answer after hours. Finally, I did what I had been avoiding. I called Olivia's cell. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Her voice sounded wary. "Olivia, it's Emma. I'm trying to reach Dan. Is he still at the office with you?" A pause. "No, he left around 7. Said he was heading home." Either she was lying or Dan was. Neither would have surprised me at this point. "Thank you," I said, and hung up before she could respond. 2 hours. 2 hours between when he supposedly left the office and now. 2 hours in which he wasn't answering his phone. 2 hours he couldn't account for. I finished my wine and poured another glass. Then I did something I had never done before. I logged into our home security systems app and checked the garage camera footage. Scrolling back through the day, I could see my own arrival at 6:43 p.m., but no sign of Dan's car before that. Next, I pulled up our credit card app. The most recent transaction was from an hour ago. Dan's card at Paradiso, the upscale restaurant where we had celebrated our company anniversary. $176. $40. Dinner for 2. I took a slow sip of wine, surprising myself with how steady my hand was. Now I knew. He wasn't just having an affair with his secretary. He was openly dating her, taking her to our favorite restaurant while I sat at home waiting to discuss our crumbling marriage. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke my thoughts. I closed the credit card app, but left the security camera feed open on my phone, watching as Dan's Audi slid into the garage. 9:28 p.m. I heard the door from the garage open, his footsteps in the hallway, then his voice, artificially bright. "Emma? Sorry I'm late. Got caught up with a client call." I remained seated at the kitchen island, my back to the entrance. "Which client?" He entered the kitchen, setting his keys on the counter. "Reynolds. Last-minute concerns about the campaign launch." I turned slowly to face him. "Interesting. And did Reynolds join you and Olivia at Paradiso? Or was it just the two of you for your 176 at dinner?" His expression froze, then shifted through confusion, denial, and finally resignation in rapid succession. "Emma, don't." I held up my hand. "Don't insult me with more lies. I saw the credit card charge, Dan. I know exactly where you were, and who you were with. What I don't know is how long you think you could maintain this charade." He sank into a chair across from me, his facade crumbling. "It's complicated." "Is it? Seems pretty straightforward to me. You're having an affair with your secretary. She's pregnant with your child, and you've been systematically pushing me out of our company while I trusted you to honor our partnership." His head snapped up. "How did you know about the baby?" I pulled out my phone, showed him the Sonogram email. "Olivia sent this to me, Tuesday afternoon, probably not intentionally." Dan's face drained of color. "Emma, listen." "No, you listen. For once in our marriage, you will listen to me." I set my wine glass down carefully. "I have given everything to this relationship and this company. I left a promising career to build something with you. I worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificed my personal life, put my name and reputation on the line. And all the while, you've been taking more control, more credit, more ownership, leaving me with less and less of what we built together." "That's not what happened." "It's exactly what happened. I have the paperwork to prove it. Every contract, every restructuring, every dilution of my ownership. And now I have proof of your infidelity as well." I stood up, suddenly too restless to remain seated. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to my sister's tonight. Tomorrow I'll be consulting with a divorce attorney. And on Monday we'll Begin discussing the dissolution of both our marriage and our business partnership. He stood too, panic flashing in his eyes. Emma, wait. We can work this out. The company? Think about everything we've built. I have thought about it. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. And I've realized that what we built isn't what I thought it was. It's not a partnership. It's not even a company that reflects my values anymore. I picked up my purse, already packed with overnight essentials. It's just an extension of your ego, and I'm done supporting it. You can't just walk away. We have client obligations, contracts. I'm not abandoning my professional responsibilities. I'll be at the office on Monday, doing my job, but our personal relationship is over, and our business relationship will be restructured on fair terms, or it will end as well. Fair terms? He laughed harshly. You signed the agreements, Emma. Legally, the company structure is sound. I paused at the doorway, looking back at him. Are you really sure about that, Dan? Because I've been reviewing those agreements very carefully, and I've found some interesting discrepancies. But we can let the lawyers sort that out. His expression changed, caution replacing arrogance. What discrepancies? Monday, Dan. We'll talk about it all on Monday, with our respective legal counsel present. I walked out before he could respond out of the kitchen, through the hallway, and into the garage. My hands were shaking now as I started the car, but my mind was clear. The confrontation had gone exactly as James had predicted. Initial denial, then an attempt to minimize, followed by veiled threats about legal standing. Dan had revealed his playbook, and it contained no surprises. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from him. Don't do anything rash. We need to talk about this rationally. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say tonight. The next move was mine, and for the first time in years, I was the one setting the terms. I drove through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, past the houses with their warm glowing windows, families inside living their normal lives. I wondered how many of those homes contained similar secrets, similar betrayals. How many partnerships, business or personal, were built on uneven ground. My sister lived across town in a modest apartment above a bookstore. Kate had never approved of Dan, had warned me years ago that his charm masked a fundamental selfishness. I hadn't listened then. I was listening now. As I parked outside her building, my phone buzzed again. Not Dan this time, but a name that surprised me. Olivia Martinez. Her message was brief. I need to talk to you. Alone. It's important. I stared at the text for a long moment, weighing my options. She was the last person I wanted to speak with right now. And yet, knowledge was power in this situation. If she wanted to talk, perhaps she had information I could use. I typed back, tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Daily Grind coffee shop on 4th Street. Her response came immediately. I'll be there. Thank you. I pocketed my phone and grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, I needed rest and the comfort of someone who had always seen through Dan's facade. Kate opened her door at my first knock, took one look at my face and pulled me into a tight hug. He finally showed his true colors, didn't he? I nodded against her shoulder, allowing myself, for the first time since receiving that sonogram, to cry. The Daily Grind was half empty when I arrived, deliberately 10 minutes late. I spotted Olivia immediately, seated in a corner booth far from the windows. She wore an oversized sweater despite the warm morning, her hands wrapped around a mug, eyes darting nervously toward the door. When she saw me, her posture stiffened. I ordered a black coffee at the counter, taking my time, observing her from a distance. This woman who had slept with my husband, who carried his child, who had sent me evidence of their betrayal, accidentally or not. In another life, I might have hated her. Now, I just felt a detached curiosity. Olivia, I said, sliding into the booth across from her. You wanted to talk. She looked smaller somehow, away from the office environment where she moved with practiced efficiency. Her makeup was minimal, her eyes shadowed with what might have been exhaustion or fear. Thank you for meeting me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know you have every reason to refuse. I set my phone on the table between us, screen up. I'm recording this conversation. She nodded. That's fair. So talk. Olivia took a deep breath. First, I want to say I'm sorry. Not that it matters, but I never intended to send you that email. I was updating my medical records and must have selected the wrong contact. She paused. Though maybe subconsciously, I'm not interested in your psychological analysis of your own actions, I said coldly. If you asked me here to apologize, consider it done. Is that all? No. She straightened slightly. I asked you here because Dan is planning something you should know about. I took a sip of my coffee, keeping my expression neutral despite the sudden acceleration of my pulse. Go on. After you left last night, he called me. He was angry, scared. He said you were threatening the company, that you might have found some problems with the legal agreements. She hesitated. He asked me to access your company email and files, to look for evidence of what you know. I hadn't expected this. He asked you to hack into my accounts? That's illegal. I know. I told him I wouldn't do it. She looked down at her hands. That's when he told me about a contingency plan he's had in place for months. A way to protect the company if anything ever happened between you two. What kind of contingency plan? A separate LLC, Horizon Ventures. He's been gradually transferring intellectual property, client relationships, even some revenue streams, to this entity. It's registered solely in his name. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. It's all in here: account numbers, corporate filings, email correspondence with the lawyers who set it up. I stared at the folder, not touching it. Why would you give me this? Olivia's eyes met mine directly for the first time. Because last night after he told me about this plan, he said something that scared me. He said he wasn't going to let you destroy everything he'd built, that he'd make sure you ended up with nothing before he let that happen. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. And I realized that if he could do this to you, his wife, his business partner, what might he do to me if I ever became inconvenient? The cynical part of me wondered if this was a trap, a way for Dan to feed me false information or trick me into acting rashly. But the fear in Olivia's eyes seemed genuine. How do I know this is real? Check the documents. Verify them independently. I'm not asking you to trust me. She hesitated. But there's something else you should know. The baby. Dan told me he would leave you after the first trimester, that we would be together officially, build a life. But last night, when he was angry, he let something slip about another situation in Chicago that he'd handled discreetly. I think I'm not the first. The Chicago office. Dan had spent 3 months there last year, setting up our satellite location. I had visited only twice, busy with client work in our main office. He had seemed distant when he returned, but I'd attributed it to the stress of expansion. Why tell me this now? Why not weeks ago, months ago? Self-preservation, she admitted. I'm 4 months pregnant. I don't have family in this city. My job, my healthcare, my future, it's all tied to Wilson Peterson, to Dan. She straightened her shoulders. But I won't be used as a weapon against you, and I won't let him make me complicit in destroying what you built. I finally reached for the folder, opening it carefully. Inside were copies of legal documents, bank statements, emails, a paper trail of systematic corporate theft disguised as legitimate business restructuring. If these were authentic, Dan hadn't just been planning to reduce my role. He had been preparing to leave me with an empty shell while he walked away with the real assets of our company. Does anyone else know about this? Robert Johnson from the board. He's countersigned some of the documents, and probably your CFO, though I don't have proof of that. Robert, the board member who always sided with Dan, who had pushed hardest for the restructuring that diluted my ownership. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. What are you hoping to get out of giving me this information? Olivia met my gaze steadily. Protection. A severance package that includes health care through my pregnancy and maternity leave. And your word that when this all comes out, you'll make it clear that I came to you, that I wasn't part of his scheme. Practical requests. Self-interested, but not unreasonable given her situation. If these documents are legitimate, I'll ensure you're taken care of. I closed the folder. But understand this, I don't forgive what happened between you and my husband. I'm offering protection, not friendship. I understand. She stood gathering her bag. There's one more thing. Dan's meeting with Robert and the CFO today at noon. Not at the office. At Robert's club downtown. I nodded, committing this to memory. Thank you for the information. Olivia hesitated at the edge of the table. For what it's worth, I do regret my part in all of this. Not just the affair. The way I watched him systematically undermine you at the office. The way I facilitated it. You deserved better. I said nothing as she walked away. Her regrets meant nothing to me now, but her information, if authentic, could change everything. I immediately called James from the coffee shop, giving him a brief overview of what I'd learned. He instructed me to bring the documents to his office immediately and warned me not to confront Dan yet. If this is what it appears to be, we need to move carefully, James said. Corporate theft, breach of fiduciary duty. These are serious allegations. We need to verify everything before proceeding. By noon, James's team was working to authenticate the documents while I sat in his office, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. Not just an affair, not just the gradual dilution of my ownership, but a calculated plan to strip me of everything I had helped build. The documents appear genuine, James said, returning to his office after consulting with his associates. The LLC exists. It's registered to Daniel Peterson alone, and based on these bank records, it's been receiving regular transfers from Wilson Peterson marketing accounts. Transfers that I never approved, I said, that were never disclosed. To me as a co-owner. Exactly. James sat across from me, his expression grave. Emma, this changes our approach significantly. What Dan has done here isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. Corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty to a business partner. What do you recommend? We file for divorce immediately, citing the infidelity. Simultaneously, we prepare a civil lawsuit against Dan personally for his business conduct, and we notify the board of directors about the Horizon Ventures entity. He leaned forward. But most importantly, we need to secure the company's assets before Dan can move anything else offshore. How do we do that? We get an emergency injunction freezing the company accounts. But to do that, we need to demonstrate immediate risk of harm. Do you know what Dan is planning next? Any major financial moves coming up? I thought about what Olivia had mentioned, the meeting today with Robert and the CFO. I believe he's accelerating his plans. He knows I've discovered the affair, that I'm questioning the business structure. He won't wait long to make his next move. Then neither can we. James picked up his phone. I'm calling Judge Watkins. We've worked together for years. If anyone will grant an emergency weekend hearing, it's her. While James made his calls, I reviewed the documents more carefully. There were emails discussing the transition of key assets to protect them from potential disruption. Client contracts mysteriously amended to include language about affiliated entities. Bank transfers labeled as intercompany loans that were never repaid. The scheme was elaborate, clearly planned over months, if not years. My phone buzzed with a text from Dan. "We need to talk. Where are you?" I showed it to James, who shook his head. "Don't respond yet. We don't want him to know we're mobilizing legally." By 2 o'clock, James had secured an emergency hearing with Judge Watkins. For 4 p.m., we spent the intervening hours preparing our case, gathering the most damning evidence into a concise presentation. "Wear something conservative, professional," James advised. "First impressions matter, especially in emergency hearings." I changed into a navy suit I kept at Kate's apartment for client emergencies, pulled my hair back into a sleek bun, and removed all jewelry except for simple pearl earrings. The goal was to look composed, reasonable, professional. Not a vengeful wife, but a wronged business partner with legitimate grievances. Judge Watkins was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. Her chambers were wood-paneled and austere, with law books lining the walls and a single photograph of her family on the desk. She reviewed our documents in silence, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Richardson," she said finally, "you're asking me to freeze the assets of an established company on a Saturday afternoon, based on documents provided by the wife of one of the principals, who is also seeking a divorce. You understand my hesitation." "I do, Your Honor," James replied. "But these are not merely marital grievances. Ms. Wilson is a 30% owner of Wilson Peterson Marketing, and these documents show clear evidence of assets being diverted to a separate entity owned solely by her husband. The timing of this hearing is dictated by genuine concern that more assets will be transferred imminently." The judge turned to me. "Ms. Wilson, when did you become aware of these alleged transfers?" "This morning, Your Honor. A company employee provided the documentation out of concern for potentially illegal activity." "And why do you believe further transfers are imminent?" "My husband became aware last night that I have discovered both his infidelity and questions about the company structure. Additionally, I was informed that he is meeting with board members today specifically to discuss company finances. Given the pattern established in these documents, there is reason to believe he is accelerating his plans." Judge Watkins studied me thoughtfully. "You understand that if I grant this injunction and your allegations prove unfounded, you could be liable for damages to the company." "I do, Your Honor. I would not be here if I were not confident in the evidence." She returned to the documents, reviewing them once more. "I'm granting a temporary freeze on Wilson Peterson marketing accounts for 72 hours. During that time, Mr. Richardson, you will file a formal complaint and motion for a preliminary injunction, which will be heard by the court on Tuesday morning." She signed an order and handed it to her clerk. "Ms. Wilson, this freeze applies to you as well. Neither you nor Mr. Peterson may access company funds during this period." "I understand, Your Honor. Thank you." As we left the courthouse, I felt strangely light, as if a weight had been lifted. For the first time since discovering the sonogram, I had taken concrete action to protect myself, to fight back against Dan's betrayal. "What happens now?" I asked James as we walked to his car. "The court will notify the company's banks of the freeze order. By the time Dan tries to make any transfers, he'll find the accounts locked." James checked his watch. "It's almost 5. We should go to your office now, secure any additional evidence before Dan realizes what's happening." The office was quiet when we arrived, most employees gone for the weekend. I used my keycard to access the executive floor, leading James to my office. We worked methodically, downloading files, copying documents, securing anything that might be relevant to our case. I was accessing the shared drive containing client contracts when my office door opened. Dan stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What the hell is going on, Emma? The bank just called. Our accounts are frozen. James stepped forward. Mr. Peterson, I'm James Richardson, Ms. Wilson's attorney. I suggest you contact your own counsel immediately. We have evidence of systematic transfer of company assets to your personal LLC, Horizon Ventures, without board approval or disclosure to your business partner. Dan's face paled, then flushed with anger. You've been talking to Olivia. His eyes fixed on me. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Those transfers were legitimate business expenses, properly documented. Then you'll have no trouble explaining them to the judge on Tuesday, I said calmly, continuing to copy files to an external drive. Emma, this is insane. We're married. We're business partners. You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Married partners don't father children with their secretaries, I replied, my voice steady. Business partners don't secretly divert company assets to entities the other partner has no access to. So, which kind of partner were you trying to be? Dan? Because from where I'm standing, you've failed at both. He took a step toward me, but James moved between us. Mr. Peterson, I strongly advise you to leave and contact your attorney. Any attempt to interfere with Ms. Wilson's access to company documents could be construed as obstruction. Dan's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might try to physically intervene. Then his phone rang. He checked the screen, his expression shifting subtly. This isn't over, he said, backing toward the door. You have no idea what you're doing, Emma. No idea at all. After he left, James placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did well, standing your ground without escalating. I nodded, but my hands were trembling slightly as I finished copying the files. The confrontation had been brief but intense, a glimpse of the battles to come. We should go, James said once we had secured everything we needed. Dan will likely return with his own attorney, and I'd rather avoid another confrontation today. As we drove away from the office, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from Dan. You're making a terrible mistake. Calls from board members. Emma, what's going on with the company accounts? And finally, an email from Robert Johnson to all staff and board members. Emergency notice. Due to suspected unauthorized financial activity, all Wilson Peterson employees are asked to refrain from accessing company systems until further notice. An emergency board meeting has been called for Monday morning at 8 a.m. Attendance is mandatory for all executives and department heads. They're spinning this against you, James observed as I read him the email, making it sound like you're the one who's done something improper. It's what Dan does best, reshaping the narrative to make himself the hero, or at least the victim. I stared out the window as city streets blurred past. What do we do now? We prepare for Monday. The board meeting will be contentious, but with the court order and the evidence we've gathered, you have leverage. And we file the divorce papers first thing Monday morning as well. Will I lose my job over this? James considered the question. Carefully. Possibly. But if what these documents show is accurate, the company as it exists now may not survive anyway. What's important is securing your fair share of its value and protecting your professional reputation. Back at Kate's apartment, I found my sister waiting anxiously. What happened? You've been gone all day. I summarized the events, Olivia's revelations, the emergency court hearing, the confrontation with Dan. Kate listened in silent outrage, occasionally squeezing my hand in support. That absolute bastard, she said when I'd finished. I always knew he was selfish, but this is sociopathic. The thing is, I said quietly, part of me isn't even surprised. Looking back, the signs were always there. The way he would take credit for my ideas. The way he would negotiate business decisions without me. I just didn't want to see it. Because you loved him, Kate replied. Because you believed in the partnership. Because I was a fool. No. Kate's voice was firm, trusting your husband, your business partner, doesn't make you a fool. It makes him a betrayer. There's a difference. My phone rang again. Dan, for the 5th time that hour. I silenced it without answering. You should get some rest, Kate suggested. Monday is going to be intense. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, replaying moments from my marriage, my business partnership, searching for the exact point where things had gone wrong. Was it when we first decided to start the company together? When we adjusted the ownership structure the first time? When he hired Olivia? Or had the seeds been planted even earlier, in those first days at Horizon Marketing when his charm had blinded me to his ambition? Sunday morning brought a temporary calm. Kate and I had breakfast at a cafe far from our usual haunts, somewhere Dan wouldn't think to look for me. I had turned off my phone, unwilling to deal with his messages or calls from concerned colleagues. For a few hours, I allowed myself to simply exist without the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. By afternoon, however, reality insisted on intruding. I needed to prepare for Monday's board meeting, to review the evidence with fresh eyes, to develop a strategy. I turned my phone back on to find 17 missed calls, dozens of texts, and an email from Lisa in HR with the subject line, "Urgent, please call me." I called her from Kate's landline, wanting to keep my location private. "Emma, thank God," Lisa said when she answered. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Lisa. What's going on?" "It's chaos at the office. Dan called an emergency executive session yesterday evening. They voted to suspend your access to company systems pending an investigation into financial irregularities." My stomach dropped. "They can't do that. I'm an owner, not just an employee." "I know. That's why I'm calling. The official story is that you've been diverting client payments or something, but nobody who knows you believes it. And..." She lowered her voice. "Olivia didn't show up to the meeting. Dan said she's called in sick, but her desk has been cleaned out. I thought of Olivia's request for protection, her fear of becoming inconvenient to Dan." "Lisa, has security footage from the office been preserved? From Friday and Saturday?" "I don't know. Why?" "Just make sure it doesn't get erased if you can. It might be important." I paused. "Lisa, I appreciate the call, but you should be careful. Don't put your job at risk for me." "Emma, half the creative team is ready to walk out if they try to fire you. We know who really drives the success of this agency." Her voice softened. "Just be prepared for tomorrow. It's going to get ugly." After we hung up, I called James to update him on this new development. "They're moving faster than I expected," he admitted. "But this actually strengthens our case. Suspending a founder without due process based on fabricated allegations. The judge won't look kindly on that." "What about the board meeting tomorrow?" "We attend. We present our evidence calmly and professionally. We don't get drawn into emotional confrontations. Remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. Now, you're fighting for the truth about the company you built." By evening, I had prepared my statement for the board, organized my evidence, and steeled myself for the battle ahead. Kate ordered takeout, opened wine, and did her best to distract me with stories from her bookstore. "Remember when we were kids?" she said as we sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by empty containers. "And that bully Tommy Peters stole your science project?" I smiled at the memory. "And you marched right up to him in the cafeteria and dumped milk on his head." "No one messes with my sister." Kate raised her wine glass. "Dan Peterson is just a grown-up version of Tommy. All talk, no integrity. And tomorrow, you're going to take back what's yours." I clinked my glass against hers, grateful for her unwavering support. "I hope you're right." "I know I am. You've always been the strong one, Em. Even when you didn't realize it." Later, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. "It's Olivia. New phone. Left the apartment. Dan came by, made threats. Said he knew I'd talk to you. Be careful tomorrow. He's desperate. I showed the message to Kate, who immediately insisted that I not go to the board meeting alone. James will be with me, I assured her, and it's in a public place with the entire board present. Dan won't try anything there. Still, I don't like it. This man has already shown he's capable of elaborate deception. Who knows what else he might do? I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I rehearsed my statement for the board, anticipated Dan's counter-arguments, and prepared responses to every possible scenario. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolved. This would be the day I took back control of my narrative. I dressed with careful deliberation. A charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, subtle makeup that highlighted my features without appearing theatrical. Professional, controlled, unimpeachable. James met me outside the office building at 7:45 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase that contained copies of all our evidence, including the court order freezing the company accounts. "Ready?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. More than ready. The boardroom was already half full when we arrived. Conversation stopped abruptly as heads turned to stare at us. I recognized the expressions: confusion, curiosity, discomfort. These were people I had worked with for years, built relationships with. Now, they didn't know what to believe. Robert Johnson approached immediately, his normally affable expression replaced with stern disapproval. "Emma, this is an internal company matter. Your lawyer isn't authorized to attend." "Actually, Robert, since this meeting concerns allegations against a company founder and owner, legal representation is not only appropriate, but advised." I handed him a printed copy of the court order. "You should also be aware that a judge has ordered the company accounts frozen pending investigation of unauthorized transfers to an entity called Horizon Ventures. Perhaps you could explain your role in establishing that company?" Robert's face paled as he scanned the document. Before he could respond, Dan entered the room, accompanied by a man I recognized as Harvey Grant, one of the city's most aggressive corporate attorneys. "Emma." Dan's voice was controlled, but his eyes blazed with anger. "I was hoping we could resolve this privately." "That opportunity passed when you started transferring company assets to your personal LLC," I replied coolly. "Or perhaps when you fathered a child with our employee. Take your pick." A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the room. Clearly, not everyone had been informed of the full situation. Harvey Grant stepped forward. "Ms. Wilson, these unfounded allegations are exactly why this meeting has been called. Your reckless actions in freezing company accounts have put client relationships at risk and—" James interrupted smoothly. "My client's actions were approved by a judge based on documented evidence of financial impropriety, evidence we are prepared to share with the board today." The CFO, Mark Daniels, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should begin the meeting formally. Take this one step at a time." I caught his eye, held his gaze steadily. Mark had always been scrupulously professional, focused on the company's financial health. If he had been involved in Dan's scheme, it would have required significant pressure or deception. The board members took their seats around the long mahogany table, Dan at one end, me at the other, with James beside me. The department heads lined the walls, standing uncomfortably, as if unsure whether they should be present for what was clearly becoming a founder's dispute. Robert called the meeting to order, his voice strained. "As you all know, we're facing an unusual situation. Company accounts have been frozen by court order based on allegations made by Emma Wilson against Daniel Peterson. Dan has requested this emergency meeting to address these allegations and determine next steps." Dan leaned forward, his expression grave. "I'll be direct. Emma and I are going through a difficult personal situation. She discovered evidence of an inappropriate relationship, and has reacted by making unfounded accusations about company finances. While I regret the personal pain I've caused, I cannot allow it to destabilize the company we've all worked so hard to build. I remained perfectly still, watching the faces around the table. Some nodded sympathetically at Dan's words. Others looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. The freeze on company accounts, Dan continued, was obtained through misrepresentation of normal business transactions as somehow improper. The transfers to Horizon Ventures were approved investments in a potential subsidiary, fully documented and legitimate. Then why? I asked quietly. Was Horizon Ventures established solely in your name, with no disclosure to me as a co-founder and owner? Why does the operating agreement specifically exclude Wilson Peterson Marketing or any of its principals except you from control or profit sharing? Dan's jaw tightened. Corporate structures are complex. Not everyone needs to be involved in every decision. Including the decision to transfer ownership of the Anderson account, our largest client, to this separate entity? Or the decision to reassign intellectual property created by my team to Horizon Ventures without compensation? To Wilson Peterson? Murmurs grew around the table. Mark Daniels looked particularly troubled, shuffling through papers in front of him. Emma, Dan said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that was all too familiar, you're misinterpreting standard business practices because you're upset about personal matters. I understand that, but no. I stood, my voice firm but controlled. You don't get to rewrite this narrative, Dan. Not anymore. I turned to address the full board. For years, I have allowed my contributions to this company to be minimized. I've watched my ownership stake diluted through restructuring. I was pressured to accept. I've been excluded from key decisions despite being a founder, all because I trusted my business partner. That trust was misplaced. I nodded to James, who distributed folders containing our evidence to each board member. What you're holding is documentation of systematic financial impropriety. Transfer of company assets to a separate entity controlled solely by Dan Peterson. Client contracts quietly amended to allow future transition away from Wilson Peterson Marketing. Intellectual property reassigned without compensation. This isn't about my marriage. It's about the company I helped build being stolen from under me. The room fell silent as board members began reviewing the documents. Mark Daniels in particular seemed to be comparing our evidence with his own files, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Dan's attorney attempted to regain control. These documents lack context. Many of these decisions were approved through proper channels. Which channels? I challenged. Because as a 30% owner and co-founder, I was never consulted, never informed. If these decisions went through proper channels, those channels deliberately excluded me. Mark Daniels looked up from his review. Dan, some of these transfers, but I authorized them based on your representation that they were temporary measures for tax purposes, with Emma's knowledge. Are you saying she wasn't informed? Dan's expression hardened. We're getting sidetracked by details. The point is that Emma has taken drastic action that threatens the stability of this company based on personal grievances. My grievance, I replied steadily, is that you have been systematically undermining my position in this company while planning your exit strategy. A strategy that apparently includes taking our major clients, our intellectual property, and our revenue streams with you. I paused, looking around the table. I wonder how many of you were included in this plan, and how many of you, like me, were meant to be left with an empty shell. Robert shifted uncomfortably. The other board members exchanged glances. The division was becoming clear, those who had been complicit and those who had been kept in the dark. This is absurd, Dan said, but his confident facade was cracking. I've always acted in the best interest of the company. Everything I've done has been to secure our future, Our growth. Our growth? I raised an eyebrow. Or your growth, Dan, because these documents tell a very different story. They tell the story of a man preparing to abandon the company he co-founded, taking everything valuable with him and leaving his partners, including his wife, with nothing. The creative director, Sophia Chen, who had been standing silently against the wall, finally spoke. "Is this true, Dan? Have you been planning to leave the agency?" Dan hesitated just a fraction too long. "Of course not. I'm committed to Wilson Peterson." "Then explain this email," I said, quoting from memory words I had read and reread a dozen times since yesterday. "Once the transition is complete and the key accounts are secure under the new entity, we can allow the original company to wind down naturally." Your words, Dan, to Robert, dated 3 months ago, before Olivia's pregnancy, before any personal difficulties between us. This was always your plan. Mark Daniels stood abruptly. "I need to make something clear to the board. I approved certain financial transactions based on representations made by Dan that now appear to have been misleading. If these emails are authenticated, we have a serious governance issue that goes beyond a dispute between founders." Dan's attorney placed a restraining hand on his client's arm as Dan started to rise. "I suggest we adjourn this meeting to allow for a more careful review of these allegations." "Convenient," I observed. "Just as the evidence is becoming clear, you want to shut down the discussion." James spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "My client has no objection to a thorough review. In fact, we welcome it. But any such review must include independent forensic accountants with access to all company records, including those related to Horizon Ventures." Robert looked to Dan, clearly seeking guidance on how to proceed. Dan's face was a mask of controlled fury, his options narrowing with each passing minute. "Fine," he said finally. "A full review, but the company needs to function in the meantime. The account freeze is untenable." "The freeze remains in place until Tuesday's court hearing," I replied, "unless you're prepared to return all assets transferred to Horizon Ventures and restore my full partnership rights immediately." The why ultimatum hung in the air. Dan's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Dan's eyes never left mine. I could see the calculations behind them, the weighing of options, the recognition that his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. "This isn't over," he said quietly, echoing his words from Saturday. "Not by a long shot." "On that," I replied, gathering my papers, "we finally agree." The board meeting ended with an uneasy truce. A special committee would be formed to investigate the allegations, comprised of 2 board members not aligned with either Dan or myself, plus an independent financial expert. The company accounts would remain frozen until Tuesday's court hearing, but essential operations would continue through personal guarantees provided by board members for urgent expenses. As people filtered out of the boardroom, I remained seated, organizing my documents with deliberate calm. I could feel eyes on me, some sympathetic, others uncertain, a few openly hostile. The narrative was shifting, but the battle was far from over. Emma. Sophia Chen, our creative director, approached cautiously. She had been my first major hire, recruited from a top agency in New York. "Can we talk privately?" I nodded, following her to her office down the hall. She closed the door behind us, her expression troubled. "I need to know something," she said. "How bad is this going to get? The creative team is confused, scared. Half of them are loyal to you, half are terrified of crossing Dan. We have client deadlines this week, campaigns launching. I need to know if we're going to survive this." It was a fair question, one I hadn't fully considered in my focus on exposing Dan's betrayal. The company employed nearly 50 people, all of whom depended on its stability for their livelihoods. "The company can survive," I said carefully, "but it will change. Dan has been siphoning assets, clients, intellectual property to his separate entity. Even if we stop him now, there's damage that can't be undone easily. Sophia ran a hand through her short black hair. The Anderson account? Already partially transferred to Horizon Ventures, according to the documents. She swore softly. That's 20% of our revenue. I know, but we still have the creative team, your team. We still have the talent and relationships that built those accounts. I leaned forward. Sophia, I need to know where you stand. Not as a friend, but as an executive of this company. Her dark eyes met mine without hesitation. With the truth. Always with the truth. Dan has been taking credit for your work for years. We all see it. Most of us just didn't know what to do about it. Relief washed through me. Then help me. Protect the team while this plays out. Keep them focused on the work. Shield them from the politics as much as possible. If clients call with concerns, be honest but emphasize stability and continuity. And if Dan gives contradictory instructions, document everything. And remind the team that their employment contracts are with Wilson Peterson Marketing, not with Dan personally or Horizon Ventures. Sophia nodded. I can do that. She hesitated. For what it's worth, Emma, I'm sorry about the personal side of this. It's a hell of a thing to deal with both at once. I managed a small smile. One betrayal at a time, right? As I left Sophia's office, I spotted Mark Daniels, our CFO, waiting in the hallway. His expression was guarded, troubled. Emma, do you have a moment? We found an empty conference room, neither of us wanting to use our own offices, which suddenly felt exposed, potentially monitored. I need to explain my position, Mark began once we were alone. Some of those transfers, I authorized them based on explicit assurances from Dan that you were aware and had approved the strategy. Did you get that in writing? Mark winced. No. It was presented as a tax strategy that needed to be implemented quickly. Dan said you were traveling but had verbally approved. He rubbed his temples. I should have verified directly with you. That's on me. Yes, it is. I wasn't in a forgiving mood. Did you know the Anderson contract had been amended to allow transfer to Horizon? Not until last week, when the accounting team flagged unusual payment routing. I questioned Dan about it then. He said it was a temporary measure during contract renegotiation. Mark looked genuinely distressed. Emma, I've worked with you both for 5 years. I never imagined Dan would. I mean, you're married. You're partners. Were, I corrected. We were partners. I studied him, assessing his sincerity. What will you tell the special committee? The truth. That I executed transactions based on misrepresentations. That I raised concerns when I discovered irregularities last week. That I regret not verifying approvals directly with both founders. He met my gaze directly. I made mistakes, Emma. But I wasn't complicit in fraud. I believed him. Mark had always been meticulous, principled, the type who would follow proper procedures unless deliberately misled. Prepare a complete accounting of all transfers to Horizon Ventures or any other entities connected to Dan, I instructed. I want it ready for Tuesday's court hearing. Already working on it, he assured me. And Emma. What happens if the judge rules in your favor? If the company accounts remain frozen indefinitely? We restructure. We reclaim what assets we can. We rebuild if necessary. I stood, gathering my files. But Wilson Peterson Marketing will survive, with or without the Peterson. By afternoon, the office was humming with nervous energy. People huddled in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly when others approached. I remained in the small conference room, which had become my temporary base, working with James on our strategy for Tuesday's hearing. The morning's evidence strengthens our case considerably, James observed, particularly the CFO's admission that he was misled about your knowledge of the transfers. What about the divorce proceedings? Have the papers been filed? James nodded. This morning, as planned. Dan will be served by end of day. He hesitated. There's something else we should discuss. Olivia Martinez contacted my office and hour ago. She wants to provide a formal statement about Dan's activities, including conversations she witnessed, documents she processed. Is she asking for something in return? Just the protection we already discussed. Healthcare, severance, and your word that you won't pursue legal action against her. I considered this carefully. Her testimony would help our case significantly. She was in a position to observe and facilitate many of Dan's actions, and as a pregnant woman fearing for her future, she makes a sympathetic witness. The tactician in me recognized the strategic value. The wounded wife in me still recoiled at the thought of aligning with the woman who had slept with my husband. But this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about justice. Set it up, but make it clear. This is a limited alliance of convenience, not forgiveness. My phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert from the local business journal. Trouble at award-winning agency Wilson Peterson? Sources report internal power struggle. James read it over my shoulder. That was fast. Someone's talking to the press. Dan, I said with certainty. Controlling the narrative has always been his specialty. The article was brief but damaging. Unnamed sources describing disagreements over company direction and personal issues affecting business operations. No specific mention of the financial improprieties or the affair, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about the agency's stability. We need to respond, I said. Not directly to the article, but to our clients, before they start calling in a panic. James looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? Anything you say to clients could be used in court. If we say nothing, Dan's version becomes the only version. Besides, I'm not going to make accusations or get into details. Just reassure them that the agency is stable and their projects are on track. With James's reluctant approval, I drafted a careful email to our top clients. Dear client, you may have heard rumors about internal changes at Wilson Peterson Marketing. I want to personally assure you that your projects remain our highest priority, and our creative and account teams are fully committed to maintaining the excellent service you expect from us. While we are navigating some temporary administrative adjustments, these will not impact the quality or timeline of your deliverables. Your account manager will be reaching out directly to address any specific concerns. Thank you for your continued trust in our partnership. Warm regards, Emma Wilson, co-founder, Wilson Peterson Marketing. I showed the draft to James, who approved it with minor adjustments. Diplomatic, reassuring, no specific claims that could backfire. But be prepared for clients to ask more direct questions. I'll handle them individually if necessary, I said, sending the email to our client list. The important thing is to show leadership and stability. Within minutes, my phone began ringing. Clients seeking more information, account managers asking for guidance, industry contacts probing for gossip. I answered each call methodically, maintaining the same calm, professional tone regardless of the question. Yes, the agency was undergoing some internal restructuring. No, client work would not be affected. Yes, I remained fully committed to the company's success. Between calls, I checked my email obsessively for any response from Dan. Nothing direct, but I noticed he had sent his own message to clients shortly after mine. Similar reassurances, but with a subtle undermining of my authority. As CEO, I want to personally assure you. The implication was clear. He was in charge. I was the problem. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, but resolved. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, focused determination. Dan had betrayed me twice over, as a husband and as a business partner. He had planned meticulously, moving pieces on the board while I trusted blindly. But now the game had changed. I was no longer a pawn in his strategy. I was a player with my own pieces, my own moves. James left to prepare for Tuesday's hearing, promising to call with updates on the divorce filing. I remained at the office, knowing my presence sent an important message to the staff. I wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't conceding anything. At 7, there was a knock on the conference room door. Lisa from HR entered, looking uncomfortable. "Emma, I hate to add to everything you're dealing with, but Dan has instructed me to revoke your building access and email privileges, effective immediately." She set a document on the table between us. "This is the formal notice. He's citing the company bylaws regarding executives under investigation." I scanned the document, noting the selective quoting of bylaws that had been written primarily to deal with external investigations, not founder disputes. "Has he revoked his own access as well?" I asked, "since he's equally under investigation by the special committee." Lisa looked even more uncomfortable. "No, he says as CEO he needs to maintain operational oversight." "Of course he does." I kept my voice level, not blaming Lisa for being caught in the crossfire. "What about my team? Have they been restricted as well?" "Not yet. But Dan has called a mandatory staff meeting for tomorrow morning. I think he's going to announce a reorganization. A preemptive strike, then." Dan was moving faster than I had anticipated, trying to solidify control before Tuesday's hearing. "Thank you for telling me, Lisa. I know this puts you in a difficult position." She nodded, hesitating at the door. "The meeting's at 9. If someone happened to arrive earlier and speak with key staff members, well, that would be their choice." I smiled slightly. "Noted." After Lisa left, I called Sophia immediately. "Dan's making his move. Mandatory staff meeting tomorrow at 9. He's already trying to lock me out of the building and systems." Sophia swore colorfully. "What do you need from me?" "Gather the creative leadership team at the office at 7:30 tomorrow. Conference room B, not the main boardroom, and download any essential files tonight, just in case." "Already doing it," she assured me. "Emma, how far is he willing to go with this?" "All the way," I said grimly. "He's fighting for his reputation, his future, his narrative. He won't back down easily." "Then neither will we." Next, I called James to update him on this development. "We need to file an emergency motion to prevent Dan from making any organizational changes before Tuesday's hearing," I explained. "He's trying to create facts on the ground that will be harder to reverse later." "I'll draft it tonight and file first thing tomorrow," James promised. "In the meantime, forward me the access revocation notice. It directly contradicts the special committee's authority and could strengthen our case." I was about to leave when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Wilson, this is Detective Rivera with the Financial Crimes Division. We've received some concerning information about Wilson Peterson Marketing that I'd like to discuss with you." My breath caught. Someone had escalated this beyond a civil dispute. "What kind of information, Detective?" "Allegations of wire fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of company funds. Normally, we wouldn't get involved in what appears to be a business dispute, but the documentation we received raised significant red flags." He paused. "The complaint was anonymous but quite detailed. Olivia, it had to be. She had mentioned documentation I didn't have access to, patterns she had observed from her position as Dan's assistant." "I'm happy to cooperate, Detective. When would you like to meet?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. My office, police headquarters, 9 a.m. The same time as Dan's staff meeting. Not a coincidence." "I'll be there," I confirmed. "Should I bring my attorney?" "That's your right, though this is just a preliminary conversation. You're not being accused of anything, Ms. Wilson." "Not yet, perhaps. But I knew Dan well enough to recognize the strategy. If he couldn't control the narrative, he would muddy the waters, create enough doubt and chaos that even the truth would be difficult to discern." After hanging up, I called James again, explaining the new development. "Dan's trying to create a criminal investigation to distract from his own actions," I concluded. "Or worse, trying to frame me for the very thing he's been doing. It's a desperate move, James agreed, but potentially dangerous. I'll accompany you to the meeting. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone else at the company. If Dan has set this up, he may have planted false evidence or manipulated records to implicate you. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could remember about the company's financial procedures, approval processes I had followed, signatures required, checks and balances in place. If Dan was trying to frame me, I needed to be prepared to defend every transaction I had ever authorized. By the time I left the office, the building was nearly empty. Security guards nodded politely as I passed, unaware that my access was supposed to have been revoked. Lisa must have delayed implementing Dan's order. The night air was cool against my face as I walked to my car. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment of pure grief, not for the lost marriage, which had clearly been built on sand, but for the dream we had shared, the company we had created together, the vision we had pursued, all of it tainted now by betrayal and deceit. My phone rang again as I reached my car, Kate checking on me. I'm okay, I assured her. It's been intense, but I'm holding my own. Have you eaten anything today? She demanded. I realized I hadn't. I'll grab something on the way home. No, you won't. You'll come to my place. I've made lasagna, enough for an army, and you can tell me everything. The thought of returning to Kate's apartment, to warmth and support and normalcy, was suddenly overwhelming. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I drove, I allowed myself to think beyond the immediate crisis for the first time. What did I actually want from all this? Revenge? Justice? Vindication? The company restored to what it had been? No. That was impossible now. Too much had been revealed. Too many betrayals uncovered. Wilson Peterson marketing as it had existed was already gone. The question was what would rise from its ashes, and what my role would be in that new creation. Kate was waiting with wine, comfort food, and unwavering support. I recounted the day's events, the shifting alliances, the escalating tactics. He's called in the police, she asked, incredulous. That seems like an admission of guilt, not a power move. It's a distraction, I explained. He knows the evidence against him is mounting, so he's trying to create confusion, cast doubt on my credibility. Classic Dan, when cornered, create a bigger spectacle elsewhere. What's your next move? Meet with the detective. Present the evidence clearly. Focus on Tuesday's hearing. I took a sip of wine. And arrive at the office before Dan's staff meeting to make sure my side of the story is heard. Kate studied me thoughtfully. You seem different. Calmer. More focused. I am. I realized it was true. The shock and pain had receded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I've been trying to fit into spaces Dan created for me, in our marriage, in our company. Spaces that kept getting smaller. Now I'm creating my own space, by my own rules. Good. Kate squeezed my hand. Because the Emma Wilson I know doesn't shrink herself for anyone. I slept better that night than I had since discovering the I. Sonogram. Not peacefully, but with purpose. When my alarm sounded at 5:30 a.m., I rose immediately, prepared for the day with methodical precision. Navy suit, powerful but not aggressive. Pearl earrings, classic, trustworthy. Hair swept back in a sleek bun, control, composure. James picked me up at 6:45, looking as if he had barely slept. I filed the emergency motion at the court's opening, he informed me. The judge has agreed to hear it at 8:30 before your meeting. With the detective. Will we have a ruling before Dan's staff meeting? Possibly. I've requested an immediate injunction preventing any organizational changes pending Tuesday's full hearing. We arrived at the courthouse by 7:15, waited anxiously in the hallway outside the judge's chambers. Dan's attorney appeared just minutes before the hearing, looking harried and unprepared. This emergency motion had clearly caught them off guard. Judge Watkins listened impassively as James presented our argument. Dan Peterson was attempting to make structural changes to the company while under investigation for financial impropriety, potentially destroying evidence and undermining the court's previous order freezing company accounts. Dan's attorney countered weakly that as CEO, Mr. Peterson had the right to address staff and make operational adjustments that didn't affect frozen assets. The reorganization was merely to maintain stability during a difficult transition. Judge Watkins wasn't convinced. Given the serious allegations of financial misconduct and the evidence presented on Saturday, I find there is reasonable cause for concern that structural changes at this time could prejudice the court's ability to render appropriate relief on Tuesday. She signed the order with a flourish. No organizational changes are to be implemented until after Tuesday's hearing. Mr. Peterson may address staff, but may not alter reporting structures, terminate employees, or modify operational procedures. Relief washed through me. The first victory of the day. Dan's attempt to consolidate control before Tuesday had been blocked. We hurried from the courthouse to police headquarters, arriving just before 9. Detective Rivera was a compact man, with intelligent eyes and a deliberately neutral expression. He ushered us into a small interview room, apologizing for the institutional setting. As I mentioned, Ms. Wilson, this is just a preliminary conversation. We received documentation alleging financial irregularities at Wilson Peterson Marketing, with specific evidence suggesting wire fraud and misappropriation of funds. May I ask who submitted this complaint? James inquired. It was anonymous, Rivera replied. Submitted through our online portal with attached documentation. And this documentation implicated my client specifically? Rivera hesitated. It indicated potential wrongdoing at the executive level. The complaint suggested Ms. Wilson might have relevant information. I exchanged glances with James. The complaint had been carefully worded to trigger an investigation without making direct accusations against me. Dan was setting the stage, creating a cloud of suspicion that would hang over Tuesday's hearing. Detective, I believe I know what this is about, I said calmly. My business partner, Daniel Peterson, has been diverting company assets to a separate entity called Horizon Ventures. We've documented these transfers and presented evidence to the court, which has frozen company accounts pending a hearing tomorrow. I suspect this anonymous complaint is an attempt to muddy the waters. I slid across copies of the key documents we had presented to the board, transfer records, the Horizon Ventures operating agreement, emails discussing the transition of assets. Rivera reviewed them with professional thoroughness. This is helpful context, Ms. Wilson. The complaint we received didn't mention Horizon Ventures specifically, but did allege unusual transfers that bypassed normal approval processes. My client has initiated both civil proceedings and a company investigation into these transfers, James added, all of which were authorized by Mr. Peterson, not Ms. Wilson. The detective continued asking detailed questions about company financial, procedures, approval hierarchies, and documentation requirements. I answered each clearly and completely, occasionally referring to my notes to provide specific dates or amounts. After nearly 2 hours, Rivera seemed satisfied. Based on what you've shared, it appears the anonymous complaint may be part of an existing business dispute rather than a new criminal matter. I'll review everything carefully, including the documents you've provided today, before determining next steps. Will you be contacting Mr. Peterson as well? James asked. As part of our due diligence, yes. But I want to emphasize that at this stage, the department isn't taking sides in what appears to be primarily a civil dispute. As we left police headquarters, I checked my phone and found it flooded with messages. Dan's staff meeting had proceeded, as planned, but without the reorganization announcement he had clearly intended to make. Instead, according to Sophia's texts, he had delivered a carefully worded speech about difficult transitions and maintaining our core values during challenging times. The most interesting message, however, was from Mark Daniels. Emergency. Board call at noon. Robert resigned this morning. Special committee wants to present preliminary findings. Robert Johnson, Dan's strongest ally on the board, resigning abruptly? The special committee moving faster than expected? Something significant had happened while we were with Detective Rivera. We need to get to that board call, I told James, showing him Mark's message. James checked his watch. We can make it. But barely. Let's head to my office. We can join securely from there. As we drove, I tried calling Sophia for more details about the staff meeting, but she didn't answer. Mark's phone went straight to voicemail. Even Kate didn't pick up when I tried her. A seed of unease took root. Something was happening. Something beyond the expected moves and countermoves of the past few days. James's office was quiet when we arrived, most of his staff at lunch. His assistant set us up in a conference room with a secure phone line for the board call. At precisely noon, we dialed in. The usual electronic beeps announced participants joining: board members, the special committee chair, legal counsel. No sign of Dan yet. Is everyone here? Asked William Chen, the special committee chair. Dan Peterson hasn't joined, someone noted. He's been informed of the call, William replied, his tone grim. We'll proceed without him if necessary. This can't wait. My unease deepened. William, it's Emma Wilson. What's happening? Mark's message mentioned Robert resigning? A heavy pause. Yes. Robert Johnson submitted his resignation from the board this morning, effective immediately. His letter cited personal reasons, but the timing is significant. Significant how? Another pause. The special committee accelerated its investigation last night after receiving concerning information. This morning, we uncovered evidence that Dan Peterson and Robert Johnson had been planning to announce the dissolution of Wilson Peterson Marketing at today's staff meeting, with immediate termination of approximately 60% of employees. Gasps echoed across the conference line. The plan, William continued, was to transition key clients and senior staff to Horizon Ventures immediately, leaving Wilson Peterson Marketing with its debts, lease obligations, and legal liabilities. The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. Not just pushing me out, not just taking what he wanted, but deliberately destroying what we had built and abandoning those who had helped build it. How did you discover this? I managed to ask. Olivia Martinez contacted me personally last night, William replied. She provided copies of presentation slides prepared for today's meeting, as well as recordings of Dan and Robert discussing the strategy. Olivia. She had been playing both sides, giving me enough information to fight back while providing the special committee with the smoking gun they needed. Where is Dan now? Someone asked. That's the other reason for this emergency call, William said, his voice somber. According to security, Dan Peterson cleared out his office at approximately 4 a.m. this morning. His company laptop is missing, as are various files. We've been unable to reach him by phone or email since. The implications settled over the call like a heavy fog. Dan hadn't just been planning to destroy the company. He was planning to disappear once the destruction was complete. Have the police been notified? The company's general counsel asked. Yes. Given the evidence of financial impropriety and now the removal of company property, we've filed a formal report. William paused. We've also learned that significant transfers were attempted from company accounts to Horizon Ventures at 3:45 a.m. this morning. They were blocked by the court-ordered freeze. I thought of Detective Rivera's carefully neutral expression, the anonymous complaint that had been filed against the company. Not just a distraction tactic then, but part of a larger exit strategy. create enough confusion and suspicion to buy time for escape. "What about Olivia?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "Is she safe?" "Ms. Martinez is cooperating with the special committee and has been provided with security as a precaution," William assured me. "Her testimony has been formally documented in case it's needed for legal proceedings." The call continued, discussing immediate steps to stabilize the company and reassure clients. Emergency board powers were invoked to appoint an interim management team. The special committee was authorized to communicate with the court regarding Tuesday's hearing, now with this damning new evidence of attempted asset stripping. Throughout it all, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what Dan had attempted and how close he had come to succeeding. If not for Olivia's intervention, if not for the court freeze on accounts, if not for the special committee's swift action, he might have destroyed everything and vanished with the spoils. When the call ended, James squeezed my shoulder gently. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. I knew he was capable of betrayal. I just didn't realize the scale of it. I looked up at him. "What happens now?" "The company moves to protect itself. The board appears to be acting responsibly. The courts will handle the financial aspects." He paused. "As for Dan, that depends on whether he's fled the jurisdiction. If he has, this becomes a very different kind of case." My phone rang. Sophia finally returning my call. "Emma, it's a madhouse here. Have you heard?" "About Dan cleaning out his office and disappearing?" "Yes, I just found out on the board call." "Not just that," Sophia said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "He sent termination emails to the entire creative department 10 minutes ago. From his personal email, not the company account. Said the agency was restructuring effective immediately, and their services were no longer required." My blood ran cold. He can't do that. The court specifically prohibited organizational changes. Tell that to 20 terrified employees who just got fired by a vanishing CEO. Sophia took a deep breath. "We're fighting it, of course. HR is sending out immediate countermanding notices, assuring everyone their jobs are secure. But the damage to morale." "I'm coming in," I decided instantly. "Tell everyone to stay put. We're going to address this head-on." James looked concerned as I ended the call. "Emma, are you sure that's wise? The situation at the office sounds volatile. That's exactly why I need to be there. Dan is trying to create chaos, destroy what we built out of spite. I won't let him." James nodded, recognizing my resolve. "I'll come with you, just in case." The office was in chaos when I arrived. Small groups huddled in corners, some people openly crying, others angrily showing each other Dan's termination email on their phones. Lisa from HR was moving from group to group, distributing printed notices countermanding the terminations. But the damage to morale was evident in every face. Sophia intercepted me at the entrance, her expression a mix of relief and tension. "Thank God you're here. It's getting worse." Dan apparently accessed the project management system remotely and marked all active projects as canceled before IT could lock him out. "Have clients been notified?" "Not officially from the company, but some have already called after team members reached out in panic. The Anderson account executive is on his way over, demanding answers." I took a deep breath, centered myself. This wasn't just about my personal betrayal anymore. It was about the livelihoods of everyone in this office, the relationships we had built with clients, the work we had created together. Dan was willing to burn it all down rather than lose control. "Call everyone to the main conference room," I instructed. "Everyone, from reception to executive level. 5 minutes." As people filed into the conference room, I stood at the front, projecting calm confidence despite the turmoil inside me. James took a position at the back, observing quietly. "Thank you all for coming," I began once the room had filled. "I know many of you received disturbing emails this morning, and I want to address that immediately." Those termination notices are invalid and have been formally countermanded by HR. No one has been fired. Your jobs are secure. A visible wave of relief moved through the room, though uncertainty remained in many faces. Wilson Peterson Marketing is currently undergoing significant challenges, both organizational and legal. I won't sugarcoat this or insult your intelligence by pretending everything is fine. I paused, making eye contact with key team members. Dan Peterson attempted to execute unauthorized terminations and project cancellations this morning before disappearing with company property. The board has invoked emergency powers to stabilize operations, and a special committee is overseeing an investigation into financial irregularities. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I raised a hand for quiet. I understand this is shocking and concerning. You have questions, you have fears, and you deserve answers. I will tell you everything I legally can, and I promise complete transparency moving forward. For the next 20 minutes, I explained the situation in clear, direct terms: the discovery of financial improprieties, the court-ordered freeze on accounts, Dan's attempt to transfer assets to his separate entity, and his current disappearance. I didn't mention the affair or pregnancy. Those were personal matters irrelevant to the staff's professional concerns. The most important thing you need to know, I concluded, is that this company will survive. We have talented people, loyal clients, and quality work. We have a board acting responsibly to ensure continuity. And we have each other, the real heart of any successful agency. Thomas Garcia, our senior account director, stood up. What about the clients? Dan emailed several of them directly this morning, telling them the agency was undergoing catastrophic internal issues and suggesting they seek services elsewhere. My jaw clenched at this new revelation. Damage control begins immediately. Account teams will contact every client today with a unified message. The agency is stable, their projects are secure, and we have the full support of the board during this transition. Sophia's team will prepare a formal statement for distribution. Any client who wants to meet personally should be accommodated immediately. And what about leadership? Asked a junior designer nervously. If Dan's gone, who's in charge? For now, the board has appointed an interim management committee consisting of myself, Sophia Chen, Mark Daniels, and Thomas Garcia. We'll maintain operations while the legal situation develops. I met their gazes directly. This transition won't be easy. There will be challenges, difficult conversations, and hard work ahead. But I believe in what we've built here, and I'm asking you to believe in it too. As the meeting broke up, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Not joy or even optimism, but a tentative resolve replacing the earlier panic. People moved with purpose, returning to their desks, reaching out to clients, working to stabilize what Dan had tried to destroy. The Anderson account executive arrived 30 minutes later, demanding to speak with someone who actually knows what's happening. I met with him personally along with his account team. Jeffrey, I greeted him, extending my hand professionally. Thank you for coming in. I understand you have concerns. Jeffrey Morton's expression was guarded, skeptical. Concerns? Emma, I received an email from Dan saying the agency is imploding, followed by notifications that our projects have been canceled, followed by contradictory messages from your team saying everything's fine. What the hell is going on? I gestured for him to sit, maintaining calm eye contact. The short version: Dan Peterson has been removed from operational control of the agency following discovery of serious financial improprieties. He reacted by attempting to damage the company through unauthorized actions, including falsely canceling projects and sending misleading communications to clients. Jeffrey's eyebrows rose. That's not what I expected. The slightly longer version involves a court-ordered freeze on company accounts, an ongoing investigation by a special board committee, and Dan's subsequent disappearance with company property. I leaned forward. But here's what matters to you, Jeffrey. Your projects are absolutely still active. The creative team working on your campaigns is intact, and the strategy we developed together, the patient journey methodology you were particularly impressed by, remains our guiding approach. He studied me for a long moment. You were always the real talent behind that strategy. The agency's talent extends far beyond any one person, including me. It's in the teams we've built, the processes we've developed, the culture of excellence we've created. I gestured to the account team beside me. These professionals haven't changed, and neither has our commitment to your success. After an hour of detailed discussion and reassurances, Jeffrey left with renewed confidence in the agency's stability. Similar scenes played out across the office as account teams reconnected with nervous clients, creative directors reassured their departments, and the interim management committee established clear protocols for the days ahead. By evening, we had contained most of the immediate damage. Clients had been contacted, projects reactivated, systems secured against further intrusion by Dan. The board had issued formal statements to key stakeholders, emphasizing continuity and financial stability. Despite the leadership change, we had survived the first day of crisis. As the office emptied, I remained at my desk, reviewing the events of the past 72 hours with a strange sense of detachment. My marriage was over. My business partnership was shattered. The company I had helped build had nearly been destroyed by the man I had trusted most in the world. And yet, I felt stronger, clearer, more focused than I had in years. James appeared at my door, briefcase in hand. Quite a day, I nodded wearily. One of many to come, I suspect. The police have issued an alert for Dan, he informed me. They're monitoring airports, train stations, border crossings. If he's still in the country, they'll find him. And if he's not? James shrugged slightly. International manhunts are complicated, expensive, and often unsuccessful, but the evidence against him is substantial. Even if he escapes immediate consequences, his reputation is destroyed. No reputable company will work with him again. Small comfort, but comfort. Nonetheless, Dan's currency had always been his reputation, his charm, his perceived integrity. Without those, his skills alone wouldn't sustain him. What about Tuesday's hearing? I asked. Given today's developments, I expect it to be largely procedural. The judge will almost certainly extend the account freeze until Dan is located, while making provisions for the company to continue normal operations under board oversight. James hesitated. There's something else you should know. Olivia Martinez has agreed to testify if necessary, but she's requesting a private meeting with you first. I had almost forgotten about Olivia in the chaos of the day, the woman carrying Dan's child, the woman whose warning had potentially saved the company from destruction. I'll meet with her, tomorrow morning before the office opens. James nodded. I'll arrange it. He studied me with professional concern. You should get some rest, Emma. Today was just the beginning. After he left, I sat in my darkening office, contemplating the path forward. Wilson Peterson Marketing couldn't continue under that name. Too much damage, too many painful associations. But the agency itself, the talent, the methodologies, the client relationships, those could survive, could thrive under new leadership and a new identity. I opened my laptop and began typing notes for a rebranding proposal. Not Wilson Creative as I had initially planned. That still carried too much of the past. Something entirely new. Something that captured the resilience, innovation, and authenticity that would define our future. Elevation Agency. The name appeared in my mind fully formed, carrying connotations of rising above, of transformation, of reaching new heights. I sketched a simple logo, an upward arrow formed by negative space between geometric shapes. Clean, powerful, forward-looking. By midnight, I had outlined a complete rebranding strategy, Not just a name change, but a fundamental repositioning of the agency around principles of transparency, collaboration, and client partnership. The very antithesis of the secretive, hierarchical approach Dan had increasingly embraced. I finally left the office at 1 a.m., exhausted but resolute. Kate was waiting up when I arrived at her apartment, despite my texts telling her not to. "You're all over the business news," she said, showing me her tablet. Local business publications had picked up the story of Dan's disappearance and the agency upheaval. Most coverage was speculative, focusing on the mysterious circumstances and sudden leadership change rather than the underlying fraud. "It'll get worse before it gets better," I acknowledged, sinking onto her couch. "Once the full story comes out, we'll be tabloid fodder for weeks." "How are you holding up? Really?" I considered the question seriously. "Strangely, I feel liberated, like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even recognize until it was gone." I met her concerned gaze. "Don't misunderstand. I'm angry, hurt, disgusted by what he did. But there's also this clarity that comes with complete betrayal. No more doubt, no more second-guessing myself, no more compromising to keep peace." Kate nodded slowly. "You seem different, stronger." "I am." I showed her my preliminary sketches for Elevation Agency. "This is what I'm building from the ashes." She studied the designs, a small smile forming. "It suits you. Forward-looking, upward-moving." She paused. "What about the divorce? Will you still proceed if they can't find him?" "Absolutely. If necessary, we'll divorce him in absentia. I'm not staying legally tied to him a day longer than required by law." Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Olivia. Professional but not intimidating, nothing that screamed wronged wife or vengeful executive. This meeting wasn't about emotion. It was about pragmatic next steps. Olivia was already waiting. When I arrived at the cafe we had agreed on, a quiet place several blocks from the office. She looked pale but composed, wearing a simple dress that didn't quite conceal her growing pregnancy. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, as I sat across from her. "Your information saved the company," I replied directly. "Whatever else has happened between us, I owe you that acknowledgement." She nodded, hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "I need to tell you something about Dan. Something you should know before the police find him. You know where he is." It wasn't a question. "No, but I know where he planned to go if things went wrong. Costa Rica. He has connections there, possibly property purchased through shell companies." He mentioned it once when he thought I wasn't listening carefully. I filed this information away, planning to share it with Detective Rivera immediately. "Is that what you wanted to tell me?" "No." She took a deep breath. "It's about the baby." Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. "Dan wanted me to terminate the pregnancy when he first found out. Said it was bad timing, that we needed to focus on the exit strategy first. He only changed his mind when he realized the baby could be useful, a way to hurt you, a distraction from his business maneuvers." The calculated cruelty was breathtaking but no longer shocking. "Why tell me this?" "Because you should know who he really is. Not just a cheater, not just a thief, but someone who viewed his own child as a tactical advantage." Her eyes met, mine directly. "And because I want you to know that I'm keeping this baby despite him, not because of him. This child will never know Dan Peterson." I nodded slowly, understanding her need to establish this boundary, this separation. "What will you do now?" "Start over somewhere new. I have family in Arizona. The severance package your lawyer arranged will help until I find work." She hesitated. "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I am truly sorry for my role in all this. Not just the affair, but the ways I enabled Dan's behavior at the office, the times I watched him take credit for your work and said nothing." "You've made amends," I said simply. The information you provided likely saved dozens of jobs and preserved the agency's future. Whatever your motives, the result matters. Relief flickered across her face. There's one more thing. Documents you should have. Account information for offshore transfers Dan made over the past year. He kept them in a private cloud storage I had access to as his assistant. She slid a flash drive across the table. It's all there. Bank accounts, passwords, transfer records. I pocketed the drive without looking at it. I'll ensure this gets to the proper authorities. I stood, our business concluded. Good luck in Arizona, Olivia. Emma, she called as I turned to Ye. Leave. For what it's worth. He was always threatened by you. By your talent, your integrity, your resilience. He knew you were the better half of Wilson Peterson. Everyone did. I nodded once, acknowledging her words without responding. The validation meant little now. I knew my worth, and I no longer needed anyone else's assessment. Not Dan's, not Olivia's, not even the board's. Tuesday's court hearing proceeded as James had predicted. The freeze on company accounts was extended, but modified to allow normal business operations under board oversight. The judge reviewed the evidence of Dan's attempted asset stripping with visible dismay, authorizing cooperation between the court and law enforcement in tracking down the missing executive and recovering company property. 2 days later, Dan was apprehended at a private airfield in Florida, attempting to board a chartered plane to Costa Rica. The flash drive Olivia had provided proved invaluable, linking him to offshore accounts containing nearly $2 million in diverted company funds. Criminal charges followed: wire fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of company assets. The business dispute had become a criminal case, with Dan facing potential prison time alongside financial penalties. I didn't attend his arraignment. I had no interest in seeing him in handcuffs, in witnessing his public humiliation. My focus was entirely forward-facing, on rebuilding the agency, on redefining my professional identity, on creating something stronger from the wreckage of betrayal. 3 months later, Elevation Agency officially launched with a private event for clients, staff, and industry partners. The rebranding was comprehensive. New name, new visual identity, new office space. In a converted warehouse across town, new organizational structure that emphasized collaborative leadership rather than hierarchical control. I stood on a small stage, looking out at the faces of those who had weathered the storm with me. Sophia, who had rallied the creative team during the darkest days. Mark, who had meticulously reconstructed the company's financials after Dan's theft. Thomas, who had personally reconnected with every major client. Lisa, who had stabilized the HR systems and employee confidence. Elevation Agency rises from experience, I began my short speech. Not just from success, but from challenge. Not just from victory, but from resilience. I raised my glass. We've learned that true elevation comes not when things are easy, but when we rise above difficulty. Not when the path is clear, but when we forge new trails through uncertainty. This agency represents that spirit, the determination to transform obstacles into opportunities, to build something better than what came before. The room erupted in applause, glasses clinking, voices calling out in support. We had not just survived, we had transformed. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Jeffrey Morton approached me with a small gift bag. "A token for your new beginning," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a sleek silver paperweight shaped like an upward arrow, the Elevation Agency symbol rendered in polished metal. "The Anderson account is fully committing to elevation," Jeffrey informed me. "In fact, we're increasing our marketing budget by 30% next year. The patient journey work you pioneered is exactly what we need as we expand." "Thank you for your trust," I replied sincerely, "especially through the transition." He shook his head slightly. "It was never about the agency name, Emma. It was always about the vision, the innovation, the integrity. Those things didn't change when the sign on the door did. As guests departed, I found myself alone in the new office space. An open-concept environment with collaborative workstations, glass-walled meeting rooms, and a rooftop garden for breaks and informal gatherings. Everything about it reflected the values I had always believed in but had gradually compromised during my years with Dan. My phone buzzed with a notification from James. Divorce finalized. Papers signed. You are officially Emma Wilson, singular entity. I smiled at his phrasing. Singular entity. Independent. Self-contained. Complete unto myself. It felt right. On my desk sat the termination papers I had signed that morning. Not for staff, but for the past. The final dissolution of Wilson Peterson Marketing. The legal close of that chapter of my professional life. Beside them lay the sonogram Olivia had accidentally sent months ago. The catalyst that had set everything in motion. I had kept it, not out of sentiment or pain, but as a reminder of the moment I had chosen truth over comfort, courage over compromise. I gathered both documents and placed them in a file labeled closed, then locked it in my bottom drawer. Important. To remember, but no longer central to my story. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky. I could see my reflection in the window. Professional, composed, standing tall in an office that now truly reflected my vision. No longer diminished, no longer overshadowed, no longer defined by someone else's narrative. His secretary had sent me their sonogram. I had sent her termination papers. But the real story wasn't about either of those documents. It was about what happened next. The reclamation of power, the rebuilding of dreams, the elevation from betrayal to triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.